Welcome to Inside the Minds of Authors, the interview show dedicated to get us up close and personal on what drives authors, where they get their ideas from, and the things that keep them going. I'm D.C. Gomez, an indie author, and come and join me in these fun conversations.
Hi, my name is Guy Wheatley. I'm the author of the Given series, and what I'm going to read is what I call a side story. It's takes something that I either made a quick reference to or a scene I didn't elaborate on, and then I wrote a few pages about that I could post and people could get an idea for the story. So this one is called Z. This is a side story to The Time I'm Given. It takes place more than 3 years prior to the events in that book, but just 4 weeks ago in Z's timeline. I watch as she eats. Those beautiful green eyes only occasionally rest on me. The rest of the time they are darting around the restaurant as though she's never seen one before. In truth, she hasn't. This morning was the first time in her existence that she left the company campus. She never even left the lab on the first day of her existence, just 5 days ago. We kept her there running tests, both mental and physical, for the first 3 days. She awakened with no personal history, simply bursting into creation with her awakening shortly before I removed her from the stasis chamber. We supplied her with an impressive database, but had no idea how well she would be able to use this mental encyclopedia to integrate into the real world. I've been pleasantly surprised at how well it works. I think there must be at least some of the original underlying personality from her original brain in the prosthetic I've given her. I believe the ghost of that original personality is what helps her make the correlation between the dry facts in her database with events in her surroundings. She was very robotic the first few hours until she learned to express the feelings and emotions within her. By the end of the first day, she had made remarkable progress from robot to charming young woman. My concerns were for her mental facilities. I never doubted her physical ones. We started with the research cadaver, or at least that's what the company believes. Her body, though completely human, is heavily modified. Those incredible emerald eyes seem to glow from a light from within because of the reflective layer behind her retinas called the tapetum lucidium in cats and other nocturnal predators that the artificial macrophages in her body build and maintain. The purpose of this structure is to give her exceptional low-light vision. The results are eyes that will cause a man to stop breathing. Her skeletal muscles are 3 times more energetic than normal, so her bones and connective tissues are reinforced with compounds designed for that purpose. She has an artificial hemoglobin that carries the extra oxygen those enhanced muscles require, but it can also sustain her for up to 30 minutes if she's not exerting herself. She's not quite indestructible, but the macrophages can repair significant damages on the fly, while moderating her sensory nerves to prevent pain. For her, a serious cut will heal in hours, a broken limb in a day. All of these features are held within a body that is almost perfect. Almost. Because we discovered that absolute perfection is actually creepy. So we added a small scar above her left eye and a tiny mole on her left collarbone. On a scale of 1 to 10, she's easily a 15. On her 4th day, we allowed her to wander around the company campus to see how well she could navigate a less structured environment than the lab. She did well enough that I managed to get permission to take her shopping on this 5th morning of her existence and to this restaurant this evening. She's enjoyed herself immensely, and though I wouldn't have believed it possible, her smile makes those incredible eyes even brighter. She takes in the world with a wide-eyed wonder, thrilled at each new discovery. She has a fresh exuberance at simply existing that gives her a soul as beautiful as her body. She thrills at simply being alive, and her childlike wonder and joy at the world is alluring. It makes you thank creation such a creature exists. It almost breaks my heart to realize this will be her last full day. Her sensory organs operate at the theoretical limit of perfect tissue, so her senses are all far better than other humans. Those enhanced senses, in conjunction with the skills programmed into her, such as reading body language, make it almost impossible to deceive her. Fortunately, she trusts me to the point that she simply does not recognize my poor attempt to hide my melancholy. I remember how thrilled she was when we entered her first store this morning. She was drawn to a beautiful formal gown, and I thought she might actually cry with joy when I explained that she could buy it and take it back to her with the lab. Now she is in awe at the restaurant and completely enamored with being here. Her pleasure at every dish we've tried is infectious, and I find an appreciation for dishes I'd grown tired of. Watching her, it's all I can do to restrain the tears. Tomorrow she will die. The neurons in her prosthetic brain are not replicating and are dying. By tomorrow evening she will have lost enough of them to be functionally brain dead. I hope the new memories she has collected over the last 5 days are being recorded onto the artificial cerebral matrix of her prosthetic brain and will be available to her if I can get a fresh batch of neurons growing on it. The process will take 6 months, and I won't know for sure until her next awakening. I've worked so hard to give her the best life that I can. I've spent far more money than the company realizes on the project, yet the best I can offer so far is 6 days of wakefulness out of every 6 months. I haven't had the heart to explain this to her yet. She will find out tomorrow when the effects of the shutdown begin to manifest in the final hours. We'll be leaving soon and headed back for the lab. Tomorrow will be a hard day for both of us, but that can wait. I want tonight to be as pleasant as possible. Her eyes light up as I order a second dessert. I suppress a sigh as I resolve to enjoy the rest of the evening.
Welcome everybody, we are back and I have the fabulous Mr. Guy. I love that reading, by the way. I was so surprised that you didn't add a scene of the book. So let's get ready because I want to know a lot more about this book. What is this book about? Because now you got me intrigued.
Okay, it's of course book one in the Given series, and the series itself has a complete arc, and in every book we get more characters. Throughout the series we have 3 voices. 2 stories are told by one character, 2 by another character, and a third character tells another story.
Who is the main character in your series?
It changes some from book to book. In the first 2 books, it's a character named Z, and I don't really want to go into a lot of it past the first book because there's kind of a surprise, or so I don't want spoilers.
Please
but
don't.
basically, Z wakes up, and it's her 5th awakening, so it's not this she doesn't know who she is stuff, but she wakes up in a stasis chamber in a laboratory at a medical research facility. And she is told that she is a research cadaver that they have managed to reanimate. And it was a very expensive process, and she soon realizes that they spent way too much money on the project and they just weren't going to continue with it, but they already had her, so they were looking for some way to get some use out of her, and they started to use her for industrial espionage.
I like that twist.
And as you can tell from the excerpt, she's physically enhanced. She's got some abilities, so.
I like the fact that she can read body language. So he's like,
Yeah.
I'm not even going to try to lie because she'll be able to
Right.
tell. I was like, that's a unique twist. What category, what is your genre for this book?
It's science fiction. At first I tried not to because it's very near term, so we're not talking spaceships or robots, no flying cars. I mean, it takes place in a very contemporary world. Other than the artificial macrophages that, are nanometer scale robots that, fuse her body and give her these abilities. Past that, everything else is pretty normal. I mean,
So it's a nice little twist. It's almost
Right.
like a little bit of urban fantasy, but with science
well,
fiction.
maybe a techno thriller.
I like that. That actually fits really
yeah.
well. So when you're looking at thrillers, you have this arc going, you have this plot. How many books in the series?
5.
So is that the whole entire series?
That is the whole entire series, and it takes a complete arc. And when I got to book 5, I realized, okay, this is it. And I was so sad because I love these characters and I love this world, and I just wasn't ready to give up on that. And so that's part of where the side stories came from. It just gave me an excuse to go back in and write a little bit more about these characters, even though it wouldn't be another complete book.
You can do little novellas. Don't worry about it. I do them all the time. I understand that feeling of complete, like, my kids are leaving.
Hey, there you go.
So tell us, is this your first series? Have you done something before? Where did this series come from?
Not my first book. I started a book, 13 years ago, and I didn't finish it. It just kind of got stuck off to the side and I never worked on it. I think it was around 2015 when I got the idea for the Given series. And basically I just had a dream. I had a dream one night and I woke up and there was this woman in a tank, like a sci-fi stasis chamber type scene. I knew that she was there medically. I knew that she was somehow tied to it. These were just impressions I had left over from the dream. I didn't really know a lot about it, but I got kind of fascinated by the idea, and I started thinking about her subjective experience. What would it be like for her, as opposed for somebody out, outside looking in?
Besides the scientists or the doctors looking, what is
Right.
that experiment? Do they have feelings?
Right. So I thought, well, I'm just going to maybe write a quick short story, and flesh out some of these ideas.
How quickly that changed.
Yeah, 60,000 words later, I had the first edition.
Ooh.
And then at the end, there's a surprise, and it was a surprise to me.
That's even better.
I did not see it coming, and when I got there, I realized, holy smoke, this thing has happened. And so that left me where I couldn't stop. I had to go on and say, okay, what happens after this point? So I wrote the second book, and in that book I had some relationships and things that I really hadn't established very well in the first book. So I went back and rewrote that. The second edition added 6,000 words, really cleaned up the prose, because that first book was a really amateur I just pray most of those have come back and been destroyed. I hope there's none out there waiting to.
Somebody doesn't actually have a first edition of the book, like, be a little bit more forgiving. It was the first one. It's okay.
Exactly. But and the funny thing with the Given series, I mean, I've got 3 genres. I've got the Given series, near-term sci-fi. I've got the political thriller, and then I've got, of course, my only nonfiction. And writing those books were a completely different experience. In the Given series, it was like crack cocaine. I couldn't stop. People say, "How did you force yourself to write?" No, it wasn't no forcing myself. I couldn't quit. I mean, I wouldn't be through with one book till I've already got half of the second book written in my mind, and I would move on to the next. And the other thing I guess I like about that process is there's something going on somewhere below my consciousness, I think, because these patterns start to emerge that I wasn't aware of. For example, every book starts out with a prologue written third-party omnipotent. Okay. But then the tale's picked up by first-person singular present tense, kind of young adult style. And then each one ends with an epilogue. Well, it didn't work out completely perfect, but it almost got to the point where the whoever was focused on in the epilogue was the narrator in the next book.
And you didn't plan this.
I didn't plan any of that.
It fell into place.
Yeah, exactly.
That is beautiful.
And the other thing, I always like to try to add some little thing. I remember a Stephen King, The Stand. I was reading that, and he spent half a page talking about this piece of quartz crystal stuck in a tire, and you go, what? That breaks the storyline, blah, blah, blah. No, it just makes that world so real.
Gives you the details that you need to see
exactly.
and feel it.
And so I try to throw in little details. Well, in the very last book, for example, there's one of the characters, and she's female, and they go shopping with their friends, and it's a high-end store, and this lady brings out champagne. She's not going on the trip, so she doesn't buy anything, so she refuses the champagne. The lady says, "Oh, please go ahead, you can come back." And she says, "I'll wait till I actually buy something to drink the champagne." Well, then later on, toward the end of the book, turns out she is great with child.
Ooh.
Well, my sister's a beta reader, and she said, "Oh, well, when she wouldn't take that champagne, I knew she's pregnant." Well, I didn't know it for like about 6 more chapters.
I'm glad you saw that, because the rest of us were not with you, but
yes, exactly.
it played really well into that story.
Well. But, my books are full of things like that, and I love those moments. They just feel so great when things connect that I didn't even know were there.
And you weren't trying it. So the story is almost somebody dictating it to you.
Oh, it absolutely is. In fact, anything I've ever done, if the characters don't kind of take over and start pushing back, it's not going to be worth. In fact, I'll probably give up. And that even goes back to my comic strip. I don't know if you knew, I ran a comic strip for 2.5 years.
You need to tell me about that. You had a comic strip to tell. Continue.
It only ran in the Gazette here locally, in a local
okay.
paper. So it was for
Still
2.5
wanna
years.
know?
Right. Well, the name of it was Barndale. And I had envisioned sort of a Doonesbury knockoff, where you would have all these politically morphological characters. There was going to be elephants and donkeys and turkeys. But as I started writing, the characters just wouldn't support me in that. I couldn't come up with storylines and so it turned into a real family-oriented strip. And in fact, one of the characters was this is so corny, but I still loved it. He was a doctor, but he was a duck, so he was Dr. Quack.
I love it. You can't.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
He was dating a lady who worked at the bank who was real hot. She was Miss Chickadee. But then later on in the strip, I had her nephew come live with her. And then I don't really go into what happened, but he winds up staying with her. First it's just a visit, and then he's going to have to stay. And I wind up turning them into a quasi-family unit.
Without trying.
Without realizing even what I was doing. And so the whole strip took on this wholesome family, small town
feel,
with almost no politics involved. Nothing like what I had envisioned.
Usually when it comes to writing and your characters take over, it has nothing to do with you.
You're right.
You're like,
you're right.
I had this plan. You know the outline we worked on?
This is the story you need to tell.
Why are you not working with me?
That's right. Exactly. That's just it. Why aren't you working with me? Because if you try to push it, and
they're not.
The time I'm given is a good example. When I started out with that, I kind of had this vague idea of mild erotica.
Assuming it didn't happen.
Yeah, Z wouldn't know. Well, a little bit of that is still in there. There's just still a few vestiges, because she uses her sexuality on the mission. Now there are no bedroom scenes, but it's a little bit of that's there. But by the time I get into the second book, she comes off as a Sunday school teacher.
That is not the same book you thought.
No, not at all.
So tell us a little bit about the political thrillers. You have 3 series going. Tell me a little bit. How about the second one?
The other series?
Yes.
That was the one I first started back in, like I say, I don't know, early 2000 or something like that. It was going to be a political thriller. It takes place in southeast Arkansas, where I'm originally from. The congressman for the 1st District's running for the White House. And this unusual coalition comes together and actually gives the guy a viable shot at winning. He thinks he's just throwing his hat into the ring to get some name recognition and getting ready for a serious run next year where maybe he can wind up somebody's running mate. But again, I have this coalition that comes together and throws enough money at it that he becomes a viable candidate.
So tell me, where did that idea come from? The first one, a dream, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
That's actually very breathtaking. It's very refreshing to hear. I'm like, you had a dream and you ran with it.
Right.
And then you have 5 books. I was like, that's a really good dream.
Yeah.
I don't know how much I can get in one dream. I was like, you got 5 books. That's amazing. What did that?
That I worked for. That I wanted to write. I was doing some Tom Clancy, reading a lot of Clancy and Patterson, stuff like that, and I wanted to just see if I could do something like that. And so, of course, you got to write what you know. And unfortunately, I don't really know politics that well, but I did work for a newspaper, and I was around people that did. So I started picking their brains, trying to see what a political campaign would look like. And then at that time, I was more progressive in those days, so I started out with kind of that thought in mind. Well, 7 years later, when I picked pen up again, I've shifted back to the right a little bit. And so it's like, okay, I don't want this character to be who I first thought he was. And so I started working on that. And part of it was I really wanted to go back and bring people from my actual community. I mean, this is an agrarian community, and it's not like an urban place. People think differently. People have different values. And there's, especially where we were from, there's a lot of almost old European feudalism involved. I mean, farmers, wealthy people are the nobles, and the rest of us are peasants. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily an adversarial relationship. Those people feel they have a responsibility to take care of us, to provide jobs, things like that. But it's not something you can earn your way into.
If you're not very class division.
Exactly, a delineated class structure. And so Marshall comes from the upper class. He's a farmer. And part of what happens is there's this guy who's born on the wrong side of the tracks. He doesn't go to college, didn't have an education. But like a line from the book says, uneducated doesn't mean stupid. In fact, Tom was brilliant. It turns out that he's just great with machinery. So just, right out of high school, he, just like everybody expected, he goes to work for some farmer. But he's so good with the machinery that other farmers find out and they start kind of bringing him stuff for him to work on. Well, he is good financially. I mean, he's smart enough to not spend his money on booze and loose women. He, starts buying equipment and stuff, and eventually winds up with a modest machine shop. And then he is so good that farmers are literally competing to get their equipment into him. And you think about it, I mean, yeah, I'm going to pay you $3,000 if you can make this combine run for another 3 years, and I don't have to buy a $140,000 combine.
That's actually a huge investment.
So anyway, Tom winds up climbing a social ladder. All right. Marshall had been dating this girl in high school, but he never was serious about her. He kind of strung her along, and so she went to college and stuff like that. Well, Marshall winds up marrying the daughter of some powerful senator who's sort of his mentor, and that leaves Jennifer, which is her name. Now she's like just out of college with no prospects,
nothing to do, nowhere to go.
And so when she looks around, she finds her best prospect, surprisingly, Tom. Because by now he's been invited to join the Farmers and Businessmen's Club, which is basically like the Chamber of Commerce in a larger town.
He's definitely moved up.
He's moved up. He's going to the Methodist Church where all the wealthy people go, and he's really and so there they invite him to the country club, and so when she starts to look around, he actually makings of a husband that she wants. She helps knock the rough edges off, teaches him some social skills, and in the meantime, he's
compensates, brings him back what he's missing.
So he starts to become more popular. Marshall can't stand it. I mean, and it's worse because of his association with Jennifer.
We got a jealousy triangle
It's
going on
not really
here.
jealousy. He never loved her enough to be jealous, but with him, it's profane. There's this defiling herself by
going to a lower class.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And I even see in the book that anybody else, he probably wouldn't have never thought of her, but that was just something he couldn't quite handle. So he starts treating Tom with unusual disdain. And at some point, he finally gets mad enough at him that he breaks Tom. I mean, it's easy to do. Tom and Jennifer get married. They start buying land They have to go into debt for it, but I mean, that's not a big deal. Tom's making enough money from the shop to pay everything off, and they're on the fast track to become a powerful family. Jennifer's lobbying to have him elected to the bank's board of directors. I mean, he's coming along, and Marshall just can't stand it. So at some point, Marshall basically opens up a competing shop, operates at a loss, and puts Tom out of business.
Ooh, jealousy and vanity.
Exactly.
Do.
And so, of course, Jennifer, and Tom and Jennifer's marriage was more of a business arrangement than a marriage. So when that fractures, she asks for a divorce. Tom just signs the papers the lawyer sends over, which makes him liable for all the expenses. And then he goes and lives on the river.
Couldn't be worse. He's like, I have nothing to lose.
Right.
Let's get out of here.
And this is just in the first chapter, all this.
Oh my God!
So, yeah.
This is the setup, and we haven't managed stuff to do. Right. I was like, what? What else can go on?
The rest of the book, basically, Marshall throws his hat into the ring. Tom finds out about it and just decides that he can't stand it. He is going to kill Marshall. And all this converges. It takes place at a place called Lock and Dam Number 1 on the Kerr-McClellan navigation system. That's a place. There's a canal between the Arkansas River and the White River where towboat traffic from the Mississippi has to go through that canal to get into the Arkansas to get on upriver to Little Rock and places like that.
Didn't know that. That's actually that's very interesting.
My dad actually worked there.
So you know exactly where this is and how it looks.
Oh yeah, I described the tunnels underneath it. I've been in those.
I'm all about that. That's awesome.
So basically, there's a retired Green Beret whose name is Gibb. My dad was retired Green Beret. His name is GB.
No connection to either one of them.
No, Gibb is clearly my dad. I even say that in the book. Or in the dedication of the book. Obviously, Dad is Gibb. But anyway, Gibb's working there at the lock. And so basically, these three lives come together. Again, it's not a spoiler. You learn early in the book that a barge had crashed 30 years before with 40,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate. Tom finds it. He's going to make a big fertilizer bomb and blow the lock up. And as the towboat comes through, he's going to blow the bottom gates out, which would kill everybody on the boat, destroy the lock. And
he couldn't just try to find a gun. we could not have done this small. Because shooting the gun would be too easy. We just need to take the entire town, the dam, and everything in between and make a point. There's no such thing as overkill, I guess. Right. I like.
And of course, Gibb is the guy working at the lock, and so they're live. It's a convergent story.
Ooh. And this is only in the first few chapters. I'm going, oh my God, what else could
Well, I basically set it up in the first few chapters. The rest of the book is basically these guys playing their lives out. Marshall actually goes to Washington, talks to his father. We see Tom go up into Missouri. He tries to make the bomb himself. He can't do it. He doesn't know what he's doing wrong. So he goes up into Missouri and finds this drunk that had been like a terrorist. He drives him out, brings him back. And
somebody has to know how to make bombs, and that's another country.
And I'll say this too. I've read the reviews on Amazon, and a couple of people have said it's really more of a man's book,
which is not a bad thing.
Not necessarily.
There's nothing wrong with that.
The thing I like is going back to the Given series. Two of those books are told first person singular as a young female, and so I'll leave it up to each reader to decide how well I found my inner female. But I'll say this much. I've had a couple of my friends accuse me of ghostwriting it. They just didn't really think that I could have written that convincingly as a female.
Are you serious?
I am serious.
No, that's it's a compliment and a little offensive all at once. I'm like, hey,
actually, I can't even be offended. If I was so successful, if they seriously doubt me, then
that's a good thing. That's a good place.
And like I say, it goes back to that first edition I was talking about. That's another reason I'd like people not to ever run across that one, because I wasn't quite as successful there. My daughter had a comment. My sister had a comment. A couple things about it. And I'll give you an example. Men and women are different.
That's not an example. That's more like a fact.
Well, okay, I guess my example is based on that fact. So there's a scene early in the book where she's at the cafeteria and she's eating and she's sort of just talking to the reader, so to speak. And because she's got this enhanced physique, her metabolism is set way high. So she walks right past the salad and she loads her plate up with pork chops and potatoes and rolls and all kinds of carbohydrates and starch. And she says, I may look dainty, but I eat like a logger. And in the original book, she said, Ann, I could whoop that logger if I had to and throw his carcass over my shoulder and haul him out of the woods. Okay. Well, my daughter read that. She goes, Dad, that really doesn't sound to me like a woman. That sounds kind of like a man. And so I started thinking about it. Okay, I agree with her, but why? why does it sound like a man? And that's because there's so much testosterone in it.
Yes.
Men compete with each other. Even our buds, I mean, even our pals, we have to be the guy a little bit on top. It's in our nature to always want to be the alpha male. Women are much more cooperative.
We want to get
Now,
along
that
with
doesn't
each other.
mean that doesn't mean that they can't be strong and do great things, but it's not to soothe their own ego as much as it is with a man. So basically, I have her go back, and she still kicks the guy's butt, but she does it in a much more gentle and nurturing way.
I don't have to tell you about it. It's just going to happen. I don't have to actually brag and tell you. You're just going to know that it happened, and you're going to understand it.
And then so I did some other things too. I started looking at cliches, and I didn't necessarily want to write a cliche, but you know, there's usually a grain or seed of truth there behind it somewhere. And another thing that I did, for example, when she gets ready to go to work for the first day, well, I spend quite a bit of time describing her outfit. And I mentioned she has this eggplant blouse with ruffles and stuff like that. And one of my friends said, "There's not a man in the world who knows what eggplant is."
If you have daughters, you would know what an eggplant is.
Google does.
Thank you. I'm like, at some point in time, if you spend enough time with people, you've gone shopping, you know certain things.
But you know, I remember seeing a chart one time. It shows a man on one side, a woman on the other, and a color line in the middle. And on the woman's side, you have all these various subtle shades of mauve, you know, fuchsia, blah blah blah. On the man's side, you got purple, blue, green. But you know, in my life, it's been that way. My wife, she would just fascinate me. People say, "Oh, where did you get that cute little outfit?" She said, "Well, the blouse came from Fred's, and I got the top at a dollar store." And we would go in, and she would pick up like a blouse or something. She'd say, "Doesn't this look like it's the same color that skirt I bought last week?" And I'm going, "They're both cloth. They're sort of in the bluish range." But she would take it home, and it would match to the point people thought it was an outfit she'd bought.
Some people have a gift for that. You know that. Everybody's
yes,
not blessed with that.
In her case, it may be even more than the normal.
Yes.
But still, it highlighted the difference to me between her and me, and generally in men and women. You know, women do catch colors more. So I was careful that Z was always, I never used blue or purple. I always, you know, used a color or something like that.
A little more descriptive. A
little
bit
more
more
descriptive.
focused. I like it.
And then there was another scene where her and a guy are, I think it's in a later book even, her and a guy are kissing. And I mentioned something about their tongues dart into my sister said, "Bubba, women don't think about tongue.
No.
That's a man thing." So I went back and rewrote it. No tongue.
I am so happy that you have people in your life who can point out some small details.
Right.
Like, that doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way.
Bring it back. You're doing good. Just not that way.
And the other thing too is again, you know, in the book, the whole point of the Given series is, you know, she is inhumanly beautiful. On a scale of 1 to 10, she's a 15. I mean, because she is inhumanly beautiful. And early in the book, I go, I mean, she acknowledges that, and she says it may sound arrogant, but it's not. She said a powerful company has spent billions of dollars making this happen. It would be a foolish exercise in false modesty. Having said that, as the book goes on, you realize how little she thinks of herself. She doesn't have she is much less impressed with herself than she deserves. She's too hard on herself.
Which is something very common in many people.
And one of the things, again, about the second edition is there's a friend she meets, Christy. And Christy's very important in the second book. Well, in actually all of the subsequent books. But in the first edition of the first book, she was just someone that was there in the lab with her. I didn't work on that. Well, as I went back and realized I have to strengthen this friendship between her and Christy, it was just wonderful, the juxtaposition that I could draw between how she saw herself and how she saw Christy.
Did she look at Christy as a role model? As
Absolutely, absolutely. She just, you know, and it's, I mean, she's got 6 days. She's doing, again, not really a spoiler. You've learned all this stuff in the first couple of chapters. They're sending her to a company to steal a compound. And so she's in there under false pretenses with a false name, and she makes friends with Christy. And like I say, she's only got 6 days. Actually, 4 or 5 that she'll actually be on the job. And so as her and Christy get to be friends, she realizes that, you know, this is not going to end well. I mean, the best thing that can happen is that I'll disappear. She never knows what happened to me. But more likely, she'll find out that I was there under false pretenses to steal from them. And she'll think, oh, it's attempt at friendship, which is a cynical lie on my part to use her. And she says, you know, she said, I'm going to have to back away from her. I'm going to have to, you know, she tries, but she can't make herself do it. And finally, toward the end, she just realizes. She said, "I'm not much of a friend." She said, "A real friend would have suffered the pain of this breakup to save her the pain that's coming later on.
She's probably more human than she thought.
That's the whole point of the book. That's what I'm trying to get in the book.
So I was going to ask you what the theme was, and we kind of went to it.
I so much enjoy reading some reviews sometimes, because so often reviewers will point things out that I didn't see or whatever. But one guy called it a modern gendered Pinocchio story, and I had never thought of it that way. But gosh,
that is actually a really good description.
It really is.
That is actually really good. It is a finding of it's almost coming of age, but in a different category if you think about it. Anytime you create a character that has to become alive and finding things. I love the description in your short story about the details and the wonder. It's what every single person loves about little kids.
Right.
Because they look at the world, they love everything, and everything's amazing.
Everything's exciting.
Everything's new and fun. Like things that we see every day, we're like, God, if you put the toilet paper in the toilet again and flush it, we're going to have some issues. Stop flushing that. But like movements and sounds and everything is huge.
Right.
And we love this about them, because as we get older, we tend to just kind of go, just another day.
In the first book, she takes on a mission legend. This young girl from Gum Springs, Arkansas, had died. Her name was Emily Davis. So she takes on, the company goes in, Emily had never even got a degree, but the company goes in, hacks the records, they delete her death certificate, they give her a degree from a medical, they give her a bachelor's degree and a medical examiner's certificate. Z takes on Emily's identity when she goes to work for the company is a girl named Emily Davis. So
she had a whole backstory, personality, and ID to back it up.
Well, the interesting thing was, in the third book, I started getting fascinated with Emily. In the second book, something happens. Again, I don't want to spoil the end of the first book, but basically, toward the end of the second book, I find out that they didn't just take Emily's identity, they had taken her body.
The whole thing.
The whole thing.
Ooh.
And now they're going to revive Emily toward the end of the second book, and there's a big reason about why they want to do that and why it's dangerous for Z and all that kind of stuff. In the third book, Emily picks up the story. She becomes the person now.
This is all sorts of twists and turns.
It is.
And it's only 5 books. I'm like, are you sure? Because that's a lot of stuff.
And in the prologue of the third book is a rewrite of a scene from the first book. But it's from a different perspective. Of course, the prologues again are written, third-party omnipotent. But in the first book, early in the book, not really a spoiler, she goes to this little dinner theater just to fight, because she has a few hours. The only few hours she's going to have the whole mission time. She's going to have a couple hours to herself, so she's trying to find what she can do, and that's something else she keeps thinking about. What do I do?
Who am I? What do I find joy in?
I'm not going to go to a bar. She's number one. I'd spend the whole night getting hit on, and number two, she doesn't really like alcohol because getting drunk feels too much to her, like when she starts shutting down from neuron loss. To her, getting drunk feels like dying. So she's just not crazy, She says, I think I might, I'll enjoy a glass of wine with dinner. I might enjoy a drink with a friend, though I've never had a chance to try. But she said, I'm not going to go to a bar. So what else can she do? And she's trying to think of what she can do. And she finally says, actually just going to a movie is great. She said, even though I'm not going to know enough current cultural references to pick up like on a comedy or something, any story well told is still worth watching. And she said, plus, it gives me a chance to be as close to the human race as I'm going to get. I get to engage with other people in a singular activity without having to actually talk to them.
Best descriptions of movies ever.
And she says, I know how sad that sounds, but that's what it is. So she's trying to figure out what she wants to go see. Well, there's a spy thriller. She says, I'm looking for escapism, not what I'm doing.
I don't want to see my job on TV.
There's a romance, some romance selections, and she says, but I think that would have to be a real possibility for someone to enjoy such a movie. That's never going to happen to me. I just can't get into it. Family features said the same thing. Said I think sitting in that theater with all those mommies and daddies and happy children would just drive me into a funk. So she finally finds this old dinner theater where they actually serve dinner during the movie while they show classic movies.
That's an awesome idea. I'm in.
There used to be one downtown here.
Really?
Yes, that's what I was thinking of when I wrote it.
I'm missing out because that's awesome.
But anyway, but the real kicker is the film for the night is The Bride of Frankenstein. Well,
appropriate.
Well, and the other thing too is like when that guy calls her Z, and that's how she thinks of herself as Z. But her official name at the laboratory is Elsa Lanchester.
Oh.
Elsa Lanchester is the actress who played the Bride of Frankenstein.
all these connections.
Well, now that's kind of on purpose. She like a running gag at the joke because she's supposedly a revived, creature, and they think that's why she named her that. But then when that movie comes up, she says, okay, I've got to go to that. Well, there she meets these 5 little guys who are these little nerds who are about to start a new tech job the next day, and she just spends a pleasant evening with them. And there's just not a whole lot to it. She enjoys the movie, and they talk, and when they first invite her, she's going to say no because obviously they're going to be hitting on her. But she just gets thinking, I don't want to sit here by myself. I'd like to have these people to talk to. And she said, I know joining strangers probably isn't smart, but they don't look dangerous. And, I can, if one of them gets too aggressive, I can just turn to one of his less, ambitious, friends. And so she just has a real pleasant evening that night with them. And then that ends and she goes home and goes on her mission. Well, that gets to be important. It turns out one of those guys is pivotal in the next book.
So everybody has a piece in the story and comes back in different places.
As the story, in the first book, it's her by herself. By the time you get to the 5th book, there's like 7, 8 people in her immediate circle.
And you're introduced in different places. I like the fact that everybody comes together. It's like our lives.
Right.
You meet people at different stages, and eventually they come back, and you're going, where do we know each other from? Oh, that's where we know each other from.
Well, in the 3rd book, again, the prologue is a rewrite of that theater scene. But now it focuses on the young men. You hear their conversations and what they're talking about and what they're thinking and how shocked they are when she agrees to come sit at the table with them.
And the huge, amazing, when you have a woman that beautiful saying yes.
Exactly.
Something must be up. There has to be a catch to that. So I think that's amazing.
But all right, then chapter number 1 in the 3rd book is a rewrite of a scene late in the 2nd book, but from a different character's perspective.
I love the different characters. I love the switching between people because everybody has a different feel. Every story is told differently.
Well, then in the 3rd book, it takes the first, because I try to write every book where if this is the first one you pick up, you're not lost. So that means, unfortunately, the first several chapters are catch up.
It's a little setup, kind of give you a little feel, so you don't have to read them in order if you didn't want to.
Right. And the other thing too, I try to intersperse it with some action, so you're getting caught up while other stuff is happening. So it's not like, it's just, even if you've read the other books, you're not completely bored, rereading the same thing.
There's a twist to every one of them, so you get to see it from a different perspective.
But in the 3rd one, the thing that's so interesting, and that's the one a lot of people say is their favorite, is because in this one, she goes back to Gum Springs. Emily finds out she had a daughter, a little 2-year-old daughter, who had died with her in the car accident, and they had buried her the company had just buried her as a Jane Doe in a cemetery. So she has her exhumed and takes her back to Gum Springs and has her buried in Richland Cemetery next to her parents.
Aww.
And when she's there, she starts meeting people that had known her as before she
passed away.
The accident. But she looks a little bit different now because now she looks like Z.
She's enhanced.
Her and Z are identical, running right down to retinal patterns and fingerprints. And there's a reason for that too. But
okay.
So some of the people who knew her, it takes her a little while to convince some of them that who she really is. But by the time you get there, she runs into Hot Springs real quick for a reason, and then she comes back, and then in chapter 13 she goes into Hot Springs, and the book finishes up in Hot Springs. And are you aware of the Hot Springs Creek Tunnel?
No.
Do you know where Central Avenue is in Hot Springs?
I do.
It runs in front of the back house. There is a river that runs beneath Central Avenue. There's a huge tunnel down there, good 15 feet tall, 30 feet wide, that this river runs through, all through Central Avenue. There's over 5 miles of creek tunnel. It goes down to where Central splits and goes off to Whittington one way and Park Avenue the other. The tunnel split and follow those guys for a ways. It goes all the way downtown to the transportation depot in Hot Springs.
Oh my God.
That's where it enters.
I knew about the Hot Springs literally because that's where they get the water. I did not realize there was a river running down to there.
And there's a smaller tunnel that goes up Fountain Street right next to the Arlington.
I'm always amazed at all the different history every single area has.
And so this goes back to the lore of the 1920s, the gangster era, right? There's all kinds of stories about secret entrances into the creek tunnel, and from what I can tell, it didn't really happen. I don't think it really did. But in my book, there's a bar called the Gangsters Retreat, and it's based on the Ohio Club. And so the Gangsters Retreat sits right where the Ohio Club is. It's owned by the father of her daughter's father.
Okay.
Her boyfriend's father, and of course, and when she got pregnant, the old man came down on her and threatened her, and basically he told her that, you know, he'd pay for the child's education and medical and a little stipend, you know, for daycare, but that's the best deal she was going to get, and so she never did really see her boyfriend again. Well, when she gets into Hot Springs, she finds out that you know, he owns that, and there's some nefarious stuff going on there. Well, I even have below the cavern, and again, it's not really a spoiler, although it takes a while to get to it. It's not, you know, you find out that there's a secret entrance into not only the caverns from his club, but there are 2 underground geodes or caves. One I call the Crystal Cavern, and it's basically he's got this casino set up in a natural cavern under the casino. And
that visual is beautiful. It's like an underground crystal. That is beautiful in so many different layers.
Well, on the other way, then you get into what I actually call the Crystal Cavern, and it's basically a giant amethyst geode.
How much research did you have to do for these books? Because there's so much detail, there's so much witness.
Quite a bit actually on that one. I actually went to Hot Springs, and I didn't go in the tunnels because the Park Service really discourages that.
I can see that. That could be kind of dangerous.
Yeah. And I didn't realize how hot, but I did find a transient person who lived there and claimed he'd been in the tunnels, and the stuff he told me matched enough of other stories I'd heard and things that I knew to make me think that he probably actually had been. I didn't realize that the creek tunnel right there in front of Bathhouse Row was just scalding hot. Well, that's where all those hot springs dumped into. They dumped into the Hot Springs Creek.
Got it.
And now you've got this tunnel, you know, entrapping the heat.
You have your own little lava molding cavern here.
Now they do, and of course there are storm drains all along Central Avenue that drain into it, so some of the heat can escape there.
We're hoping.
Well, yeah, but it's still pretty hot. And one of the shop owners right there along the front told me about just a few months before that they had to call the fire department. And when you go to Hot Springs, you can see these huge metal plates on the sidewalk with big bolts on them.
Yes.
That's access down into the tunnel. And basically, people could hear this guy down there screaming. Apparently, it's full of snakes. I guess the heat attracts snakes. And he was hot, and I guess his light had gone out. So finally, basically, the fire department had to come out and pull them planks off and pull this guy out of the hole, which explains why the Park Service is not crazy about people going up in there.
That's a horrible scene out of Indiana Jones that I'm like, I'm so sorry. Oh, scream, snakes, hot heat, horrible.
Getting back to the Ohio Club, if you've ever been in there, there's this huge bar, this beautiful oak bar that takes up more than half of the first floor. I mean, and it turns out that when the guy built that club and he had that bar brought in, he literally built a railroad track to bring that bar in. And you can still see, if you go down to the transportation depot, you can still see some of the foundations where the tracks were laid. And the guy that had been up in the tunnel told me, he said there are several places up in the tunnels where you can actually see some of the tracks still there.
That's a lot of work for a bar.
That's a lot of work for a bar. But then again, you think of the money those folks were spending. I didn't realize this until I started reading some other books too, but before Las Vegas was built, Hot Springs was Las Vegas.
You're kidding me.
I'm not kidding you.
Hot Springs, down the road from us.
A lot of the violence that went on in Chicago were gangsters fighting over this.
Because, Hot Springs, Arkansas?
Well, over the building of Las Vegas, because that was taking all the money out of Hot Springs, moving it to Las Vegas.
Who would have thought?
There's a book called, the title of it is Hot Springs, and I'm sorry I can't think of the author's name. And he writes, it takes place in the 40s, and he has a series about this detective or something, and the book Hot Springs takes place about 30 years before, and it's his main character's father, and that's the one I've read. But he really gets into the what happens during the time that they're building Las Vegas and the fights that break out. Hot Springs was considered sort of was neutral territory. You didn't bring the violence down here.
That is huge history.
It is.
Love it.
And so I tied all this stuff into the third book, and again, it takes place in a real place. My imagination runs wild, so that may be why a lot of folks like that one best. My favorite's the fourth one, and that's the only one I write with a male voice.
Why is it your favorite besides having a male voice? What is it about that book?
One of the characters winds up married to one of these enhanced women. But, okay, and the enhancements, they only keep their enhancements. They have to go back into a stasis chamber every 2 weeks for a complete refit. Their bodies are totally reset back to a baseline. So they're immortal.
That's a good way of looking at it.
If they don't go into the tank, because when they're out of the tank, they age. When they go back in, they get 2 weeks younger, basically.
Okay. Age at the same speed as humans.
Oh, it would be the same. Okay. It would be the same. So basically what happens if they never go back into the stasis chamber, eventually they would age to the point, and the macrophages, they expect a body set to very exacting parameters. You can't take macrophages from one person and think they're going to work in another person. It's even to the point where if they don't go into the tank every 2 weeks, after about a month or so, they'll have aged enough that the phages will stop working. They no longer recognize this body and quit working.
Hence the reason you got to go back.
So one of the characters, one of the enhanced women, decides, but the problem is they're sterile.
Huh.
Because in 2 weeks they're going to be reset back to, even if they get pregnant in 2 weeks, they're going to be just like they were 2 weeks ago. And for one of the characters, that's just too high a price to pay. So she stays out of the chamber, loses her enhancements,
and she becomes human.
Right, and at this point, she'll eventually take about a year for all the enhancements to finally fade. But at that point, she'll just be a regular human, live out the rest of her life, but in this case, about a year and a half after she does that, she gets mortally wounded.
And doesn't have the enhancement to repair
Doesn't have the
quickly.
enhancement to repair it. But she still has her stasis chamber, so her husband and friends in desperation just stick her in there until they can figure out what they're going to do. And they bring her back. There's a lot of emotion in this. This guy, again, the husband's telling the story. And so I really, thought about, Miss Sharon writing that, how would I feel? And this one guy did, he said, he's a whiny baby. He just cries all the time. Well, he's lost his wife, for crying out loud, And he soldiers through. And at the end of the day, he saves her. But I guess this book is the husband I would like to have been.
That is so sweet.
And but one reviewer compared it to Orpheus in the Underworld.
Ooh.
I hadn't thought of that, but he said he just needed to bring her a piece of fruit.
Let's just make this fun.
That's right.
So tell me, what age group is your books for? Like, who are you writing for?
That's a fair question. I don't know that I can answer that. I'm 60 some odd years old, and I like it. I enjoy it, and my friends who are close to my age seem to have enjoyed it. But then again, it's written in a young adult style. Okay. So I would think anywhere from pre-20s you probably wouldn't enjoy it, but I'm gonna say young adult on up.
I like that. I like that category. And how long have you been writing? I know you say you've been doing 13 years, but when did you start?
I would say I really started about 2015 when I started on the Time. Now, I work for the newspaper, so I've done columns, I've done articles, I did the comic strip. I've written a few short stories. I tried a little bit of blogging and didn't really stick with that very well. But the time I'm given was what got me writing novels. And that just felt so good that when I got through and finally realized, okay, I'm done. What can I write now? I went back and looked at Delta Mud.
For you or for your writing career, what's been one of your biggest challenge?
When I lost my job at the Gazette,
okay,
that kind of put my world in a bit of a spin. Okay, and so obviously, my focus. Anytime I spent writing, I felt that I could be using this time looking for a job. So I started doing that. Then I went to work for the prison.
That's a huge change.
That was soul sucking. It was 12 hours a day, 36 hour, 12-hour shifts, 36 hours of mandatory overtime every month, and they were going to call you in on your nights off anyway. So far as writing itself goes, I'd say the hardest one was writing the nonfiction book, because the title is The Funny Thing About Bladder Cancer. And
a little bit, because I know this is based on your life.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit.
I was laying in bed one day. Before I did that, we rode motorcycles. I had all the black. In fact, when I'd go to the clinic, most of the time I was on the bike in black leather gear. And then I'm sitting there shortly after the surgery wearing diapers.
Ooh.
Oh, I know they're supposed to be called adult protective, blah, blah, blah. They were diapers, And my goal in life at this point is to walk as far as from here to the door and make a poo-poo. And I thought, I'm a big baby. And it's like, if you can't laugh at this,
you're not going to laugh at anything.
You're not going to laugh at anything.
What projects are you working on now?
Actually, and this is kind of fun. I before, about the time I lost my job at the Gazette, I had decided to go back and do another book in the Mud universe. It's going to take place Delta Mud takes place 2020. This one actually takes place in 2017. But it's not really a prequel. It's just in the same universe with some of the same people. Well, I lost my job at the Gazette and at the prison. I just couldn't write, blah, blah, blah. I got back to the library, started getting back in a writing mood, and got all excited again. And of course, I'm checking out books like Patterson and stuff like that. And some of these guys, I mean, they're gifted writers. You go, how do they write 20 books? Well, basically, it's the same book 20 times.
Some variation of it.
And so basically, was I started looking, this one was called Beneath the Delta Mud. And it's basically based on the idea that back in the 80s, this fairly well-off farm family lost their farm, which happened to a lot of farmers. One of the kids got a good education, went out to Silicon Valley and made like millions of dollars in the tech industry.
Ooh.
And then in 2000, he basically sells that, which just happens to be right before the tech bust.
Thank God.
So he comes back, he's got millions of dollars in the bank, and he just comes back and buys the farm back just to have it. But he's such a, I mean, he's a technical nerd, and he just got such a grating personality. I mean, he doesn't try to engage with the community. Everybody despises him.
He just lives by himself in a
Exactly. So anyway, the banker just, in a little dig at him, separates the mineral rights from the surface rights.
You meant to explain that because I don't know what that means?
Yeah, basically that means that, you know, nowadays, if you buy a piece of land, you can pretty well bet you don't own the mineral rights. So, you know, if they go out there and, you know, someone shoots their gun in the ground and a big thing of oil comes up out of it.
It's not yours.
It's not yours.
Oh.
Now, but
you break my heart. I'm like, I was gonna make a hole in my backyard. Oh.
But, you know, back in farming country like Southeast Arkansas, where those farms go back generations, of course, that was before somebody came up with the idea of separating mineral rights and surface rights. So most of those farmers out there still own the mineral rights. And this character would have too if the banker hadn't slipped in that little clause separating
Just because
them.
he was that guy.
And you know, the thing of it is, you know, it's not like there's oil wells or gold mines dotting the landscape out there, so, you know, no one ever really thought it would happen. It turns out that the El Dorado oil field continues eastward, but it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. Very likely, and in fact, back in 2000, some oil companies came out, did some what they call 2D surveys, and actually signed some contracts with some farmers out there in case they ever went into production. About that time, oil prices dropped. The 2D surveys weren't definite enough to let the company know they really wanted to invest in drilling. But even as far back as the 1950s, some oil companies came out and put down some wells. But they were shallow wells, went down 4,000 or 6,000 feet, didn't hit nothing. But those 2D surveys indicated there might have been oil formations around 14,000, 16,000 feet.
Okay.
So in my book, I had, and now they have what they call 3D seismic surveys, which give you even more detail. So basically in the book, they come out and they're running 3D surveys, and the way the book was going to be written, they run 3D surveys, they find out there's oil, they start going into production, but Bill finds out that
he doesn't own
it. So basically he's going to blow somebody up because he's all mad about blah, blah, blah.
I like the fact that you have explosions and all sorts of catastrophe at a whole new level. Favorite. I'm like, this is right up my alley.
But I got to look at it and I thought, this is Delta Mud all over again. A different guy's going to blow up different people for a different reason.
But isn't that what humanity does? Over and over again?
And I just couldn't do it. So I thought, wait a minute. What if I turn the bad guy into the body and this becomes a mystery?
Ooh, okay.
So I had to go back. I had 7 chapters written. I had to go back and rewrite those. And then I started making all kinds of phone calls. Troopy and Pine Bluff probably just got sick of me. Well, in fact, I said, sir, we don't have time right now. Can you try us a little later? But I'm trying to get, like you find a body in southeast Arkansas, 5 miles east of Gillette. Who calls who? Who comes and investigates? Now, because I want the stuff as accurate as possible.
I like the research you do for all of your books. It's awesome.
Yeah. And then I also belong to a forum called a Pistol Forum. It has a lot of police officers on it. And so I found a couple guys who said they'd be glad to look over my shoulder and make sure I get a small town police department.
Correct.
Portrayed accurately. Right. So and the thing about a mystery, I didn't realize how hard mysteries were. The thrillers are okay, but you can kind of like coast along and like all these magic discoveries. But oh my gosh, I didn't realize when I was writing it that means this here. The mystery really can't be that way. You've got to have that ending nailed down
from the beginning.
So you can write to it. And but I've got it. I think there's going to be a pretty good twist.
I'm going to do a little switch. I didn't warn you about this on purpose, so you have no idea of what possibly this is. This is what I call my lightning rounds.
Oh goodness.
Everybody says that. These are fun, very light. Don't think too deep in this. One or answer whatever comes to your head. They just kind of get you in your head in a very fun way. So I'm going to give you a couple things. Do not despair, I promise. So, what do you prefer? Ebooks or print?
I prefer print. I read more ebooks.
Okay. Cold drinks or hot drinks? Don't
Hot
think too
drinks.
hard. Hot? Okay. Hiking or swimming?
Swimming.
Okay. So this might be a little bit, I don't know which way you're going to go with this. Science fiction or action movies?
Both.
Okay.
Well, by science fiction, it's an action movie.
Here's a tricky one. Okay, you have a question.
Well, no, I just you mentioned how you like explosions. In the Given series, one of the characters finally, when they come to the end of the book, one of the characters looks at one of the other characters and says, "Well, here's the fiery explosion that usually ends one of your adventures."
I love it. I'm all about explosions. It's something that I'm fascinated with. Like something needs to get blown up somehow. Let's make this happen.
You'd love the life in the end.
I got the pick. Any food to describe you, what would it be?
Hamburger.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Cheap but substantial.
I've never heard a hamburger described that way. That is awesome. So tell us, where can we find you? Our listeners are looking, readers are looking for. Where can they find you?
Primarily on Amazon. It finds out you can order me from Books A Million, Barnes and Noble, but I don't know. They're not going to have copies on the shelf, but they can order.
Well, Mr. Guy, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Inside the Minds of Authors. It's been a pleasure to have you, and to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us, and come back again for another amazing episode. See you next time.